Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Legion Timewalking has gotten extended, which gives many of you more opportunity to try some of the Legion M+ content as well as completing the Mage Tower challenges. But the more Legion dungeons I do, the more I realize how many players have never played in Legion and have no idea what many of these bosses do. That can create difficulty when trying to find a party where you're looking to complete some of these bosses for some of the rewards that have recently been buffed. I thought it'd be a good idea to put together a guide reviewing all of the Legion Mythic Plus bosses available during Legion Timewalking and how to deal with their various mechanics, in hopes that many of you guys will have an easier time when trying to complete your Legion Mythic Plus dungeons. First of all, let's talk about the new Infernal Affix, which will be present for any of the Mythic Plus dungeons you do at level 10 or above. Throughout the dungeon, next to certain bosses, there will be consoles that will summon the Burning Legion. You can either do these consoles separately before the boss or together with the boss, but pulling the boss will always activate a console. These consoles summon mini-bosses that will continuously summon legions of demons. To break it down easily, you have the Spider Lieutenant, which will put down webs underground. Just make sure to move the Lieutenant and their adds out of the webs so they can start taking damage. Take care of players that are marked with an AoE circle that will do splash damage to their allies. There's an Eyeball Lieutenant that will cast spells and put debuffs on allies. Try to keep the big eyeball interrupted and try to dispel your most vulnerable party members first. Finally, there's a Raging Lieutenant, and he will enrage. If you have Soothe or any de-enrages available, you'll want to use them immediately. These lieutenants will summon a lot of adds and armies of demons as well as infernals. The Infernals, when defeated, will send out an Infernal Core, and if those cores are caught by players, it'll let them radiate Infernal Heat, which will put debuffs on any enemies and bosses they encounter. It seems that the best strategy right now is to defeat the Lieutenants as soon as possible, and then pull the Infernals into the active boss, and then use the cores from the Infernals to debuff the boss further so they can take more damage. If your group wants to make up lost time, you could try pulling lieutenants onto bosses, but be aware because it could get very hectic. The first dungeon is Black Rook Hold. The first boss is the Amalgam of Souls. The tank should try to keep the boss in the corner so his frontal cleave doesn't hit the rest of the group. This frontal cleave can be dodged by running through the boss. The boss has a lot of mechanics where he'll target random party members with debuffs. One of them will be a scythe that will be sent out to a player location and will keep spinning there. Run these scythes away from the groups. The other one is Soul Echoes, which will follow the player and leave puddles of AoE damage. Try to stutter step your puddles away from the group. After a short time, the boss will reposition to the center of the room, siphoning souls to his location. At the end of the siphon, the boss will cast Soul Burst, which will do group-wide damage. This damage is increased for every soul that he consumes, so make sure that doesn't happen by slowing the souls and killing them. The second boss is Ilisana Ravencrest. She's gonna hurt the tank with a pretty big tank buster. She will also cast Dark Rush. She'll first target two players and then rush towards them with a Fell Rush, which will create fire on the ground. Be sure to move quickly to get out of the fire. Throughout the fight, she'll also throw glaives that will do bleed damage towards your party, which will be up to the healer to heal up those wounds. During stage 2, she resets to the front of the room and begins channeling I-beams. These will target random players and will leave fell puddles on the ground, so be very careful of the space you have with the room. During that time, she'll also summon two adds. One of them is a caster ad that needs to be interrupted. The other is an ad that needs to be tanked, and he'll do frontal tank stunts, which can be dodged. After a short time, she'll reset back to stage 1 until killed. The next boss is Smash Spite the Hateful. He does a stomp attack that will knock players back and does group damage. His main mechanic is Hateful Gaze. He'll focus on a random player and then charge towards them. That player will then be left with a debuff where the next charge will do even more damage. This charge can be soaked by other players and can be immune. As a group, you should try to manage these stacks as best as you can. He also has a very nasty tank buster where he'll make the tank more vulnerable to damage. Throughout this fight, felled bats in the air will focus down on players and will leave lines on the ground that will leave fell puddles. Try to utilize the room as best as you can and try to make sure that you're not standing in the puddles. The final boss of Black Rook Hold is Lord Ravencrest. He has a pretty nasty tank buster that will put a bleed on the tank. He'll target a random player and send out a spinning blade, which will boomerang back and forth. His advisor, Latorius, will use magic to blast purple lines on the ground. Just make sure to dodge them out of the way. After a short amount of time, the advisor turns out to be a Dreadlord, and this is where you change from fighting Lord Ravencrest to fighting the Dreadlord instead. Lord Ravencrest will bless the players with a buff that will give them more health as well as more damage and healing. Though shortly before you get this buff, the Dreadlord is going to hit the party with a Shadowbolt Volley, which will do massive group-wide damage without the buff. Make sure to save any immunities or big defensives for this part of the fight. During the fight, the Dreadlord will send swarms of flies on a player. They can be DPS'd and should be nuked as a priority. Watch out for clouds of hypnosis, as they'll put you to sleep if you stand in them. Shadowbolt Volley will continue hitting the group, though it's not as painful as the first time. There will be phases where the boss disappears, and instead there will be purple lines on the ground spinning around the room. Run together with the lines in the same direction to avoid being hit. Eye of Azshara is a 5-boss fight. The first boss is Lord Parajesh. Parajesh likes to cheat, so he'll summon extra adds to help him. One of those adds is a melee add that will try to buff the boss. The other is a caster that will try to heal the boss. Both of these adds can be interrupted. Parajesh will do charges across the room targeting the tank, leaving behind quicksand, which slows and does damage. He'll also then turn around and try to toss a spear at a random party member. The spear can either be absorbed by the tank because it will do a lot of damage, or by any of the adds that are present in the fight. He also enrages at 30%. The next boss is Lady Hatecoil. The boss will cast Static Nova, which will do a ton of damage unless the player is standing on a sand pile. However, the reverse of this ability is Focus Lightning. When getting hit by Focus Lightning, spread away from other party members to not deal damage to them. And also, if you get hit by that ability while standing on a sand dune, it will destroy the sand dunes. The boss will also curse your entire party, where those curses, upon dispelled or timed out, will send a frontal knockback at your allies, so make sure you face away from your allies before the curse expires. The boss also summons adds that'll put a slow when they die, as well as storms that'll knock players up in the air. Try to manage the adds as best you can, while making sure you don't run the sand dunes for the Static Nova. The next boss is Serpentrix. As a healer, you'll have to deal with all the poison damage that the boss sends out, as well as Toxic Wound, which will get put on the player. The player with Toxic Wound needs to run it out of the group to make sure to consolidate on space. The boss will Submerge at 33% and at 66% health, where they will summon extra adds that will cast spells. These adds can be interrupted and should be focused on by the DPS. Before you attempt to fight the boss though, there's a lot of trash adds scattered around the boss arena. You should probably clean them out first before making an attempt. The next boss is King Deepbeard. The boss will constantly summon storms that will do group damage. He'll also encase players in bubbles, putting a shield on your allies. This shield needs to be broken by intentionally taking damage. You should be actively trying to dodge ground slams at all times. The boss will use the ability of Quake, which will do damage to your party, and depending where you stand, will leave an aftershock on the ground. This aftershock then will erupt after a short delay. Try to stack these aftershocks in one place to save up on boss room space. When the boss gets low on health, he'll cast Frenzy, which will do a ton of damage to the tank. The final boss is Wrath of Azshara. Wrath of Azshara starts at very low health, which is fantastic for any classes with execute mechanics. The boss will summon storms and waves around them. Make sure to dodge any of the storms, tornadoes, or waves to reduce the group damage. The boss will mark one player with Arcane Bomb. That player needs to run the bomb away from the group, get dispelled, and run away before the bomb explodes. And you should probably stack together for Crushing Depths, as it does big physical damage to the party, but needs to be split or immuned. The next dungeon is Darkheart Thicket. The first boss is the Archdruid. Throughout the fight, the boss will summon adds that will fixate a player and walk slowly towards them, creating puddles on the ground. These adds can be slowed, CC'd, and should be DPS'd. The tank will have to deal with knockbacks, where after a short while, the boss will charge towards the tank. Just make sure you're not in the way of the charge. As a healer, you'll need to watch out for Grievous Leap. The boss will transform into a feral cat, leap to a player, and put a bleed on them. This bleed needs to be healed up to 90% of a player's health before it is removed. The next boss is Oakheart. His favorite mechanic is to pick up the tank and yeet him across the room. As the fight goes on, he'll create uproots, which will continuously spawn saplings from the ground. These roots can be DPS, or a player can stand in them to soak the roots, which will do damage to the player but rapidly deplete the root very quickly. Certain classes that have root breaks can deal with this mechanic very easily, like power shifting as a druid. As the tank, face the boss away from your party so they don't get hit by Nightmare Breath, and get ready to get stomped for group-wide damage. The next boss is Dalaran. You'll notice that around the boss room they are dragon eggs. Touching any of the dragon eggs spawns extra adds throughout the fight. Just try not to touch any of the eggs if you can. The boss has three mechanics. One is a frontal breath that can be dodged. The other is a winds attack that'll knock players back, but the closer you are to the boss, the weaker the winds are going to be. The final ability is a roar that creates a puddle on a player's location. The order of spells that the boss almost always does is breath, then winds, then puddle. so this boss is very predictable and your party should be able to deal with mechanics very easily. Finally, Shade of Xavius. Xavius will either mark players with a waking nightmare, where they need to stack on other party members, or afflict a player with paranoia, where they instead have to spread away from the group. The boss is also very notorious for doing high amounts of damage to a random party member that they focus. When the boss health hits 50%, he will do a massive blast to the party in AoE damage, and now throughout the fight is the same mechanics, but now there will be swirls on the ground. The next dungeon is Vault of the Wardens. The first boss is Tirathon. Be ready to interrupt Fury's blast after the boss leaps away. The boss will also mortar players with Fell Mortar, which will lob balls of fire on the ground that will summon adds. These adds should be your top priority. When the boss health reaches 50%, he'll gain the buff of Metamorphosis, where he will do more group-wide damage. In Havoc Metamorphosis, he'll send out eye beams that will target a player that seems to be ran out of the group. In Vengeance Metamorphosis, the boss will throw out his glaives, which will create Fell Chains. These chains will spin around the room slowly and needs to be avoided by the rest of your party. The second boss is Inquisitor. The main boss mechanic is Sapped Soul. Once you finish channeling the spell, the next ability the player uses will incur a 15-second cooldown. Try to make sure your next ability that incurs this cooldown isn't one of your basic rotational abilities. The boss will also summon orbs that will fixate players. Face the orbs when they channel at you in order to not get disoriented. Throughout this fight, the boss will also free different enemies from cell blocks. The tank needs to pick up these adds as quickly as possible so they do not overrun your party. Some of these adds will apply lingering corruption on your party. As a healer, be careful who you dispel, making sure to dispel allies that are by themselves because this will do huge AoE damage. The third boss is Ash Golem. Throughout this fight, there will be a lot of fire, a lot of lava, and volcanoes. Try to dodge the fire as best as you can, but this boss is designed to be a little bit overpowering. Watch out for any of the adds that the boss summons. If they touch lava, they'll do huge AoE damage. For your party, this room is going to do a lot of damage, and you might even feel overwhelmed. However, you can gas off the boss by freezing Ash Golem and any of the adds he spawns, which will allow you to do extra damage to him while frozen. Try to outlast in the fire phase for as long as you can, unless you have all your cooldowns available, then gas off the boss, freeze him, and nuke him down. The fourth boss is Glazer. Glazer will send out purple orbs from the center that will bounce around the room. Try to dodge these orbs, otherwise they'll split into smaller orbs. Glazer will also use Lingering Gaze to put slows on the ground. Try to move out of these as soon as you can. 30 seconds later, the boss will enter a focusing phase. He will channel a beam that will do massive amounts of damage. Try not to stand in front of it. Use the mirrors scattered around the room to redirect the beam back at himself. During that time, the boss will be beamed, taking extra damage for 15 seconds. The final boss is Cordana Felsong. In this fight, you'll constantly be using Elun's Light to illuminate a lot of these boss's mechanics. As a tank, watch out because the boss does have pretty nasty knockbacks. As a party, you want to always be dodging Moonglaves. And now for some of the light mechanics. The boss will disappear into the shadows like a rogue and needs to be found with a light. You can move Elun's Light by either picking it up or tossing it on the ground yourself. The boss is also going to summon adds that need to be nuked, but they also need to be found with the light. Someone carrying the orb or someone tossing the orb needs to toss it before revealing the add. There will also be these purple pools that will grow on the ground whenever the light isn't present. Use a light to shrink the pools away. When the boss health hits 40%, she'll summon Walls of Sentinels. These Walls of Sentinels are really hard to see unless someone has the Orb of Light. In Walls of Sentinels, there's usually a gap that's open for players to bypass safely. It is not uncommon to have both of the walls trying to intersect at the player's location, so you might want to move quickly to make sure to get to the safest spot before the next wall comes. The next dungeon is Neltharion's Lair. The first boss of the dungeon is Rakmora. Rakmora is pretty brittle, and as you DPS the boss, they will spawn skitters. These skitters themselves aren't dangerous, but they will explode when the boss casts Shatter. Shatter already does big group-wide damage, and this damage adds up for every add that is out. Every time the boss casts Shatter, it will leave crystalline ground. Try to limit your movement while standing inside of crystalline ground. Throughout the fight, the boss will throw razor shards at the tank, which can be dodged and they do a ton of damage. The next boss is Ularog. He will summon rock hands to clap you with them. Walk out of the rock hands. He will also summon totems that will try to radiate damage. Try to focus down the totems pretty quickly. He also does some moderate tank damage. But his biggest mechanic is to turn into a totem himself and make you play the cup puzzle game, where the totems will shuffle around and you have to find the right one that is the boss. Try to find the right one and DPS quickly before your party succumbs to earthquakes. The next boss is Naraxxus. Araxis is going to spit poisons everywhere, which will make it hard for melee to find good footing. The boss will also target random players and leave green pools where they stand. Try not to stand in those pools unless you are the tank. There will also be ads that will spawn throughout the fight. The boss will try to eat those ads. If the boss eats the ads, she'll gain extra damage, so try to kill the ads before they reach the boss. The boss will also try to eat the tank. When this happens, the tank will want to run into the green puddles to try to get slowed and keep rushing away from the boss. The final boss of the instance is Darkheart. He has a lot of tank knockbacks to the tanks, just make sure he isn't facing your party. The boss will also summon crystal walls that can be used at a later time of the fight. Though a lot of the tank frontal mechanics will destroy and shatter any of those walls, try to make sure that the tank frontals do not shatter the crystal walls. Besides walls, he also summons ads. These ads will fixate on players, but running these ads into a crystal wall will debuff the ads where they'll take far more damage. When the boss is full of energy, he will do insane damage. Run behind a crystal wall before his energy is full. After that insane fire damage, the boss will leave pools on the ground, so just make sure you're watching for your positionals. The Court of Stars is a 3-boss dungeon, though it isn't really shorter than any of the other dungeons. Throughout the dungeon, there are many buffs and items that players can interact with, depending on the class that you play and depending which professions you have. Some of these buffs will flat out disable certain enemies throughout the dungeon. Others will give you party buffs like crit or even extra damage, and others will let you bypass certain boss phases. It is a good idea to get a variety of different classes and a variety of different professions into this dungeon. The first boss is Patrol Captain Gerdo. Be sure to deactivate any of the arcane beacons in the boss room before starting the fight, otherwise the boss will summon ads. This boss is pretty simple. He has a frontal and a backwards cleave, as well as laser beams that will shoot out throughout the fight. All of this damage is easily avoidable. He will also cast Arcane Lockdown, which will do big group-wide damage. This debuff can be dispelled, but your allies can also jump in order to clear the debuff faster. At low health, the boss will try to drink from the flask of Solemn Night for a big damage buff, but this flask can be poisoned by rogues or alchemists, and this will end the boss fight. The next boss is Tilixay. But Tilixay has friends. These bodyguards need to be drawn away from the boss before you start the boss fight. You could draw these bodyguards away by interacting with various items scattered around the court, or by killing demonic enforcers. Tilixay will cast Infernal Flames, which will leave puddles on the ground, and summon imp ads. Nuke down the ads as fast as you can. Every time the boss uses fire spells, her burning intensity buff will increase, making her do more and more fire damage. The boss will also cast Withering Soul, which needs to be interrupted at all times. Before fighting Advisor Melandris, you'll have to join a party of Nightborn. This is a unique part of the dungeon where instead of fighting, you'll actually be gathering information from various partygoers to find out who is the demon hiding within the crowd. The different clues you can get about your target is whether they wear gloves or no gloves, long sleeve shirts or short sleeve shirts, whether they have a light vest or dark vest, and a variety of other characteristics. But afterwards is Advisor Melandris' fight. Melandris will rush to a target that will leave an after image. Keep a track of where these after images are. He'll usually track a ranged target to charge this after image towards. Any of the frontal abilities that the boss uses, the after images will mimic those abilities, so just watch out for your positionals. His hardest ability is Slice and Maelstrom. Slice and Maelstrom will do group-wide damage. The more after images there are, the harder Slice and Maelstrom will hit. And that's going to be all the guys that we have for all of the bosses available for the Legion Timewalking. Hopefully you guys found this video helpful, because we wanted to go over all of the important mechanics that I felt like every player should take a note of. Something to notice about the Legion dungeon bosses versus current Shadowlands bosses is the Legion bosses have a handful of mechanics and are generally simpler, though can be much harder hitting and even more punishing if dealt with incorrectly. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video update. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up if you found it informative or entertaining. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think about the bosses in Legion. Which dungeon of all the Legion bosses has been your favorite so far for the Legion Timewalking. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see all of you in the next one.